Hello, welcome to the Single Malt Review. Dave and Tim here with something a bit different.
Yeah, something a little bit different. Can you hear it? That distant tinkling sound approaching from on high. Could it be the 200th episode?
I think it could.
I think it is. And so part of, well, I'm planning all sorts of things that I haven't properly arranged or organised yet, but this one was easy, and I thought this one would be quite compelling, really.
Yeah.
You have here, as we can say, two Kilchomans, and you might say, well, you just reviewed one of those, and that would be true.
Yes.
But we are going back to the well, but in a rather interesting way.
Yeah, it's not a review as such, it's more of a recap or a reminiscence.
Those of you who really followed the channel since the darkest days, a few years ago now, might remember Kilchoman Port Cask Matured. I believe it's this one over here.
In the slightly ratty bottle.
One of our very first reviews. It was review number 3. And goodness, that seems like a long time ago now. We're about as wooden as the whiskey. I like to think we've developed a little bit of salubrious maturity since then, as Kilchoman has. But it's fun enough, this new Port Cask Matured from Kilchoman has been, as it happens, maturing for just about as long as we have been producing these episodes, because they pretty much put it into wood the moment this other one came out. And so I think we'll observe the evolution in Kilchoman as we maybe reminisce on the evolution of our own channel. And,
this is a perfect chance to do a bit of a reminiscence and basically a comparison, because we have here two different versions of the same whiskey. Effectively, we have the original Kilchoman Ruby Port Matured offering, and then the more recent second edition. We've reviewed them both before, so we're not going to do that again. Plus, this one's been open for well over 3 years now, so it's simply not fair to apply that same kind of standard to it. It will have changed, will maybe
might have gone a wee bit peculiar over the years. Since it will be a wee bit low now as well. Astonishing, though, that it's still there. You have an ability quite above my own to not finish bottles of whiskey. The skill I have not developed, potentially never will.
It's like an arcane form of Zeno's paradox. As the amount of whiskey left in the bottle decreases, I take smaller and smaller drams because I'm reluctant to finish off something truly amazing.
Well, I have the opposite thing. I see a low bottle and think, well, that's buggered anyway, we'll just finish that off. Put it out of its misery, I suppose. Declutter the shelf. It's different approaches, I suppose. But so really we'll just be kind of having a couple of drams here and hanging out. So thank you for joining us. But feel free to go and look at a more interesting review if this isn't your thing. But I think this will be pretty fascinating, just seeing, especially fans of Kilchoman, which is still a very new and happening distillery. Not even the newest on Islay anymore. That's just how times have changed recently. Everything always moves at a pace in the world of whiskey, except for maturing barrels, which is kind of the problem there. If they ever, that'll be the first commercial application for a time machine, I think, will be something in Diageo's R&D. They'll finally get the backing for it. But until that happens, we just have to sit here and wait, as we did, approximately 4 years almost, for this whiskey to come good. And it really, really did, if you look at the two scores. I believe this one came out as, what did we think it was? We were so old ago. We were on a 10-point scale.
We were scoring out of 10. There. About 7.5 was our average score.
7.5 was the average score. So round that up to a 75 now, and that would be considered a really pretty low score for a malt whiskey, which kind of it just demonstrates two things. One, we were very, very harsh back in the day. We were very divorced. We're still quite divorced from professional. Scotch whisky reviews now, we're still pretty real, or at least we'd like to think we are. But back then, we were real and we were raw, and we were really, really marking hard in our, 1 to 10, and then we immediately almost brought 0.5s in, and then rapidly went on to 100, because it's just a bit like that with whiskey, and you need a much finer brush once you get into fine Scotch whisky and bourbon, as we did, and rum. Never had the never has the channel these days title seemed more out of date. The single malt review.
As some commentators have been quick to point out, we review things which are very much off our beaten track.
And that's too bad. We're not going to change it. It's in the YouTube thing now. I have to do a whole thing that'll fall off the search. No, not happening.
So, the original Kilchoman Ruby Port matured whiskey. This was distilled 2011, bottled 2014, somewhere around 3 years of age, but bottled at 55% ABV.
Yeah, so a wee bit stronger than the present one.
Our comments at the time included that perhaps it would have benefited from extra maturation. Now this fella, the new one, distilled 2014, then matured and bottled in 2018, so possibly up to an extra year of maturation, which is superb. Bottled only at, I say only, what is now Kilchomans basically their default of 50% ABV. That's why I've been not too reluctant to try this one, because a relatively small bottle, 700ml, if I recall, yes, but a very strong whiskey lurking in that bottom 2 fingers there, so it won't have bled off too much of its strength, too much of its character into the surrounding atmosphere.
I think in terms of whether this has picked up any faults during its time in the bottle, that's probably unlikely because there's a good secure cork in here. There's enough in there, and it's very, very high proof, so I don't think it will have changed markedly. I think this would be a valuable opportunity for us to review our scoring processes, and at least myself, I'm going to rescore the original based on our present understanding and refinements of how we do things, and see if I come to a different conclusion. I can already say that there's no way the old one is going to end up higher than the new, but I think it might eke up a few more points based on what we understand of things now, because we've learned an awful lot along the way here.
Definitely.
My malt review.
Appreciation for highly peaty whiskey and for young whiskey, that's increased enormously. So we get to, we have the old versus new, the slightly higher strength but lower age versus slightly weaker but much more mature. In colour, those are virtually identical.
Bang on. Port's a bit like that. It always dyes your whiskey that sort of ruby red colour fairly quickly.
So for all we know, it could even be some of the same casks in here, right?
It's just possible. I would be surprised if they immediately went and reused their port casks because the fact that the colour is identical strikes me as they probably used fresh ones, because if they just put new whiskey in immediately, you'd expect a lighter colour, even with that extra year.
Plus the flavour of your whiskey would be a little bit hosed more of that kind of pre-peating of the casks.
Yeah, a little bit.
Anyway, back with the old.
So the full 55%.
Yeah, or slightly less now because of atmosphere, but still close enough for
you'd have a margin of 1%, I suspect. That much headroom in the bottle.
Still richly briny, a little bit of seaweed, a little bit of the oily fish, which I think is one of my early takeaways of very, very young Kilchoman.
Yeah, it's still, despite anything else about it, it's still Kilchoman. It's still, as I hope we are, very identifiably what it is. Its DNA is, as it is today, really, really obvious, and that's a very Islay thing. Islay, like no other place in Scotland, unless you discount the islands, because they often have exactly one distillery on them and are subsequently quite easy to pick. Islay, like no other place in Scotland, is somewhere where the distilleries have a very, very different style between them, and you can pick them out. You can say, this is probably a Lagavulin, this is probably a Lafroig, this is definitely a Bunnahabhain, and yada, yada, yada. Kilchoman, even easier than the rest, because it deals exclusively in young whiskey. There's no such thing as an old Kilchoman, because they, for their own reasons, they sell it fairly young, and they can. People will buy it, and it's quality whiskey, so they don't. Nothing behooves them to make older stuff. Much as that we would opine, knowing what this holy grail of 10-year-old Kilchoman might taste like, which they should be coming up on 10, if not rolling over, almost as we're sitting here talking about it. And I would love to try it, and I'm sure there's a few barrels rolling around somewhere, but if that does make an appearance, it'll be fairly exclusive. So anyway,
so this has been lurking in my cupboard for a very long time. I've not had a dram of this probably since we reviewed it in, what was it, January 2015 or thereabouts.
Thereabouts.
So it's been corked up and just biding its time.
Long time ago. Goodness, you had long hair back then.
Yes, I had all my hair. It was long. I wore contact lenses.
I weighed 5 kilograms less. All sorts of things.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna go straight in here to see what happens.
Oh wow! Well, It has lost none of its pep, none of its ginger and vitality. It is still vigorous and active and really quite strong.
I would have said really quite strong first. That's a mouthful.
It's lively.
That is as you'd say in this hemisphere, a pretty keen whiskey.
Yep, it's still got it going on after all these years.
Woo! I don't even remember it having quite that much savagery to it, but
I remember the harshness. That was partly why I scored it as relatively low as I did. If it was just so brutal that it was hard to appreciate its more subtle nuances. It was so raw, so immature, so potent.
That is a savagely elemental whiskey.
It just unleashes the harshness onto your palate, so you can't really savour it.
Boy, all right. So with that in my mind, I will repeat the experience with the
new,
modern version,
which was one of our very high scores.
That was a heck of a dram. That one.
92 points. Oh, you can smell. There's a creamy berryness on the nose. Oh, even on my nose, there's a difference there already.
It's hugely different. The difference. One just like blows me back almost off my chair in terms of just the sheer savagery to it. This one, granted 5% less, so that should be taken into account. There is more water added to this one.
But up to an extra year of maturation.
Another year of maturation at least. And the difference is marked. This one, suddenly you can approach and it won't bite your hand off.
You're tasting the port contribution is just so much stronger. It's so much more a part of this whiskey. It is a bigger component of it.
I think the real difference, and to sum it up in one word, is integration. It is the fully integrated whiskey, whereas this one is a very elemental, very forceful thing. The parts are not necessarily joined together. They're kind of flying loose, and you can taste it. It's not a very cohesive experience. This one, even drinking it at full 50% strength, which for an Islay whiskey, that's pretty strong, it all kind of comes together on the tongue. Yeah.
That was, I think, one of our big takeaways from that early review was that this one needed more time. It needed just to chill in its cask, just to mature, to mellow out slightly, to let some of those port characters come to the fore. And that is exactly what has happened, almost word for word, in the 2018 edition.
It is a more mature whiskey, and it's more mature than just a year would normally provide. It's more mature in how it's made and how it's aged, maybe even how it's distilled. I don't know how they've necessarily refined the process there. I haven't caught up with Anthony since 2 Dram Fests ago, and that's some time ago now. But the difference is really quite remarkable. The evolution it shows in just a few years is pretty real. I don't think you could really look at any other distillery. Not that there is a great many, well, there are a great many young distilleries, but they are so young that they are yet to actually produce whiskey. This is probably something we'll be able to see in the ongoing Ardnamurchan distillery, Adelphi's new digs over there, and the Rose Isla from, I think, Diageo has built that one, a big mega malt distillery. That'll be very interesting once it properly sort of comes online. We'll even see it from Glenallachie, now that they've had a few months to start distilling their own whiskey. We'll see more evolution from that. I think the Scotch world over, which is a pretty small one, it sort of starts at York and ends in Sternaway, but nonetheless, it has changed and will continue to change, I think, faster and faster, because whiskey's always had a cycle of boom and bust, and sucks for us. We kind of got into the whole thing. Not that we were legally able to drink previously, so there's not a whole lot we could do without a time machine. We got onto it just as it was booming, and it was booming on the back of sort of Asian, particularly Chinese markets booming, and that shows no sign of abating anytime soon. So I think the boom here, as much as my view as a whiskey pundit is worth, the boom is here to last for now. It's going to take something fairly dramatic to cut it back. The world is such a global place now that I think there will always be an audience for Scotch whisky. There will always be people with money looking to buy it up. So
the sheer number of new distilleries opening up is possibly, it's both a good sign, it means things are going well, but it means, though, there's going to be an absolute glut in due course, which could cause another little bit of a crash. However, thanks to the comparatively glacial pace of whisky maturation, it means we're still potentially literally decades before that whisky starts to flood the market. So it's going to be a long time before we have that overabundance. So it means in the meantime, we've got all the excitement, all these new distilleries opening, releasing their first products, all this new stuff to try, without the risk of things just collapsing. So this
I
is
think
a good time.
the days of there being a glut of Scotch whisky are probably gone to time now. The world is such a big place now, and Scotland hasn't gotten any bigger. I think you could cram the whole thing full of distilleries. You could use all the barley in the UK, and that wouldn't cause an overabundance of Scotch whisky. Similarly, Japanese whisky, you could pump that out at 1,000,000 miles an hour. There'd still be a market for it. I think the only thing that is going to slow down the demand in Scotch and finally make things maybe a little more affordable rather than more expensive, which is the current trend for people like us on the ground, is the trend of, and it's a good trend, local whisky production increasing in quality, which is something that's probably the main takeaway of the last 2 years of filming, at least, that we've seen, is the incredible and sharp rise in quality that we've seen in local whisky production. Whisky consuming countries and territories producing their own stuff. We've seen it in almost called it Ardbeg, we've seen it in Armrit, and we've seen it in John Paul. Really, really good Indian whiskies from a place that was previously almost the butt of the whisky joke because it was so bad.
Paul John Distillery in particular just doing amazing things, and Armrit going from strength to strength as well.
Kavalan in Taiwan producing almost overnight world-class whisky. Subsequently, almost overnight unaffordable whisky. But hey, I got one bottle in there before the whole thing went nuclear on me, so I can consider myself lucky in that capacity. Down in our part of the world, there is Starward in Australia making what I consider to be world-class whisky. We need to do a tasting of that.
I'm yet to try a lot of Australian whisky.
Yeah, it's Starward particularly, I think, really good. I need to get onto them and see if I can winkle a sample out of them maybe as a local reviewer. Try my luck on that one.
Yeah, and assorted New Zealand distillers also who are
even all the way down here, Cardrona Distillery, which I had a lovely tour of. Just a few months ago, I suppose. Producing world-class whisky there. In a lot of these cases, especially in our case, because we don't have this sort of climatic time machine that they do in India and Taiwan with this super hot, super humid climate that ages whisky quite so well. We're more on Scottish time down here, so we will have to wait a good few more years yet to see where our whisky really
Cardrona especially I'm really looking forward to. I've tried some of their sort of work-in-progress spirit at various festivals. We tried their single malt vodka was best vodka I've ever had.
It's pretty good stuff.
But they're not going to bottle their whiskey till it reaches 10 years. And Cardrona being in a sort of an alpine resort territory, it's going to be a fairly slow burn. But when it does come out, it's going to be stunning, I think.
I share that opinion wholeheartedly. And no promises, but when their whiskey is halfway there, 5 years old, which will be in about a year and a half's time, or just over that, I suspect, we might be doing a little tour around there together and having a wee sample around the warehouse just to have a little check-in, see where that whisky is, so you'll know the full story as well as us there. But as I say, no promises, but I think chances are pretty high we can have a wee crack at that one once their whisky is halfway to completion. And given how well it was tasting last Dramfest, I think that will be pretty excellent.
So, we've now added water to these fellas. Let's see how we go. Hopefully brought them down to similar strength. First with the old.
And it helps.
Oh, yeah.
It really helps.
Man, it's still a very, almost chlorinated, briny, extreme peatiness to it.
It's a pretty industrially peated whiskey.
Yeah. With some of those delicate berry fruits, some red currants starting to peek through saying, hello, I've been in the port cask, can you notice me?
The port's there, but boy, it's like the whole thing is on the verge of shaking apart.
Yeah. The fishy oiliness and the sheer piles of sea salt are starting to diminish somewhat.
But boy, does the water help. It really, really helps. It's of all the whiskies we've tried, which I've said the water is tantamount to mandatory.
Yeah.
This one, if the 55% ABV wasn't indication enough, water pretty mandatory here as well.
Yeah. Now on to V2018. In comparison, there's an explosion of juicy fruits, some creamy jams. Oh, it's buttery.
That's just more of a good thing.
Sweet. Yeah.
Whereas this whiskey needed it and benefited from it remarkably. This one didn't, by the book, need it, but it's still better with it.
It's the icing on the whiskey cake.
It's so much fruitier.
Yeah.
It's almost a completely different style of whiskey. Did I have Anthony in the room, I'd ask, have you changed your peating ratio? I don't think they've changed their peating ratio, but have you changed your distillation methods? Have you changed your wood? Or maybe it's just such a fast maturing whiskey that this is the difference a year.
I reckon it's just the influence of the port casks. Port casks are so hugely expressive. They impart so much character in so little time. Hence why you usually only see it in finishes. If you tried to mature a whiskey for 10 or 20 years in this, you would get some possibly undrinkable nonsense. But after 3, in this case 4 years, the difference there is so stark. There's so much more has come through, hence just the sort of paradigm shift in the inherent qualities of the whiskey.
Yeah, it really, really shows how far almost whiskey has come in the last few years. We've seen such an uptick in quality. Funny enough, in the blends, people more in the industry than myself will tell you that the quality of even cheap blended whiskey has come up hugely on the back of this sort of single malt resurgence, because people are subsequently so much more demanding. The demand for quality has gone up, thankfully, with the demand for money on the customer end. As things have got more expensive, the sort of the consumer eye of expecting better out of your product has turned around and has gazed at things that used to have a pretty bad reputation. Famous Grass used to have an awful reputation as a cheap trash whiskey, and we enjoyed that just fine. It wasn't the best thing we've ever tasted, but similarly, Bell's pretty good. Teachers, incredibly silly label, and you can watch an entire video dedicated to that, but still one of my bottom shelf blends of choice.
Yeah.
And recently the Cutty Sark, really, really good. No age statement, Scotch blend. And that was just not the case 5 years ago. The quality of these budget stuff, they were for, old crusties and alcoholics. They were really not pitched at connoisseurs of any kind. And so that's, I suppose, one of the few kickbacks we're seeing with the sort of gentrification of the Scotch whisky scene, which has meant everything is so much more expensive year on year. We are at least seeing the baseline for quality, I think, is what's shifted.
Yeah.
It has moved forward, and everyone who can still afford the whiskey is benefiting from that. So,
sign of the times financially too, I guess. People of our age and demographic, I guess, millennials plus, I suppose. There's less disposable income, so if you want to dispose of that income, you want to be sure that what you're disposing of it on is worth the investment.
Millennials plus is definitely what I'd put us in. I heard the other day that I was supposed to be a millennial because I was born in the mid-'80s, and I thought that was outrageous. I'd almost finished school by the new millennium. That's ridiculous. But anyway.
Yeah, global financial crises and all that means, yes, less money to go around, but things cost more, so if you're going to spend it, you need to spend it responsibly and get something that's really delivering bang for a buck, which is certainly the case here.
Get really, really properly high quality booze and drink that.
Yes.
It's the responsible thing to do.
Yes.
So, as a final thing, I'm going to combine my creations here and just see what
Kilchoman
science has wrought. Touch of the old, a touch of the new.
Kind of like this review.
It's not as good as the new one, but it's better than the old one. And that's about as profound as you think it is. If you can't tell, this is on the back of our recording session. We've done about 5 to 6 whiskies since then. So I thought we'd been quite stealthily inebriated up until this point, but I feel it beginning to kick in. So without further embarrassment, I will sign off now, but thank you for sticking with us, especially...
Weren't you going to rescore
I was. Oh, I've diddled myself now, haven't I?
No. If you were to apply a score based on today's
sorry,
maturity...
I have to... I've...
Redo from start?
Yep.
Right.
Inebriated may be, unfair, no. but I will score it with water because I think it's mandatory.
So I've been reluctant to look back. I have a lot of the old whiskies I've tried in the past. I go through bottles very slowly. So I have all kinds of amazing old, rare, single cask or whatever offerings in my cupboard, which we've looked at in the past. I could go back to those, give them a fair review, but otherwise I risk it falling into a trap of constantly reviewing my old decisions, constantly trying to second-guess myself, and that's just a recipe for neurosis.
You could bring that Spirit of Unity bottle out now. We actually have subscribers. People might actually watch it.
Yeah.
If you want to see the most unpopular whiskey video on YouTube, look up Single Malt Review Spirit of Unity. That thing has like 25 views. A truly
unique charity bottling, which we got for
didn't deserve that. Didn't deserve
and there is
75 views, but
there is still some in there. Yeah,
gold, whiskey gold. Anyway, I will attempt to concentrate here. So this is only very marginally diluted, so it's pretty much the genuine article, but I think you'd have to be insane to drink that at 55, so I will consider this its nominal strength, if not its natural strength. Was I reviewing this today with the breadth of knowledge that I've acquired over the last 3 years of chewing through and reviewing whiskies? My score would go up. And it would go up because I would realise just how rare a thing A, port cask maturation is, and B, quality Islay whiskey like this is, and high strength whiskey like
very
this
high
is
strength
too. We started on some sort of ridiculously spoiled whiskey, if you think about it. We started with a single cask, independently bottled Adelphi Macallan, and I don't think I've seen another one of those in the years.
We came into this when we were both in a position where we had quite a number of very exclusive, very rare bottlings in our collections because we had the means to do that. Ever since then, all the various adult responsibilities mean we've got to be more fiscally responsible. So they're truly outlandishly exclusive stuff. It's fewer and further between.
So with the baggage of knowledge that I have acquired over the years, it would be not a huge shift, not a massive shift. Like, I'm not going to say that I've completely changed my opinion and thus rendering all my early scores completely pointless to people actually shopping for whiskey. This would easily go up to an 81 these days, whereas previously it sat at a 75. So that's not a bad wee increase from a pretty raw, pretty rugged kind of a whiskey.
As for me, it is still pugnaciously peaty. It is still so strong that it's overwhelming the many fine qualities which the port casks should otherwise be imparting, as shown expertly by this year's bottling. But it would still elevate it at least to an 84 in my book. I can appreciate it more, I can see more of what's happening there. It's not a tremendous score, but it's more indicative of how good it is. And just comparing it to the current incarnation, it's great to see the evolution of it, how much difference a little bit of time has made, much like our channel, I'd say.
I would hope to think so. At any rate, I have a lot more episode 200 sort of celebratory content coming along in my brain, at least. I need to materialise that into actual action. I have a bit of call it a game show planned. I just need to secure a few more sampler boxes, and we might be able to do something, I think, rather compelling. But look for all that and more at the Single Malt Review. If you have watched all the way through to the end of this video, I am astonished, but very touched
grateful,
that you care, because we also care here at the Single Malt Review, or we wouldn't do it, because it's not like we get paid.
No.
We do it.
We do it because we actually enjoy it.
We don't even do it for the gram. We have an Instagram, but I couldn't figure it out, and I have subsequently forgotten, and it languishes on my phone. So, Instagram tips in the comments, please. I just couldn't figure out how to make it post sensibly. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I will say Slanger now. We might go and have a lie down, or something to that effect, and we will see you next time, because we are going nowhere. Episode 300, sooner or later. Stay safe.